Beneath the scorching desert sun, a purebred colt shivers with thirst and hunger. Its legs are chained to an iron stake driven deep into the sand. A man in an elegant suit coldly watches the scene from inside his luxury car. "No one will ever find you here," he murmurs with a cruel smile before driving away, leaving only a cloud of dust. The animal neighs desperately, its tongue parched, its eyes losing their shine with every passing hour. But when a 70-year-old beggar, living on the desert's edge, hears the desperate cries of a mare searching for her foal, something extraordinary is about to happen. What this man with nothing left to lose does to save the colt will ignite an unbelievable story. The relentless desert sun beat down like a fiery hammer on the scorching sand, and in the midst of that golden expanse, a scene of unimaginable cruelty unfolded in silence. A shimmering brown colt trembled from thirst and hunger, his delicate legs barely able to support him as a heavy chain tethered him to an iron stake hammered into the sand. His ribs already protruded beneath his silken hide, revealing endless days of suffering that no living creature should endure. Not far off, a man dressed in expensive clothes watched the scene from inside his luxury car with ice-cold air conditioning. His cold eyes contemplated the agonizing animal without showing the slightest trace of compassion or remorse. The engine purred softly as he savored every second of that calculated revenge, his lips curved into a cruel smile that revealed the chill of his soul. With a disdainful flick of his wrist, he started the car and pressed the accelerator, leaving behind only thick clouds of golden dust and an animal condemned to certain death. The engine's roar faded into the desert's vastness, replaced only by the faint whimper of the colt and the deafening silence of desolation. That act of unimaginable cruelty was just the beginning of an extraordinary tale that would unfold over the next 2 months, revealing the depths of human malice and, surprisingly, also redemption. The region where this tragedy unfolded was known for its relentless aridity and the ancestral traditions that still governed the lives of its few inhabitants. A small settlement bordered that unforgiving desert, its simple adobe and timber homes bravely resisting the biting winds and suffocating heat. It was a place where social hierarchies still prevailed with unquestionable force, where the wealthy held sway and the poor obeyed, where justice was often an empty word carried by the wind. In this hostile and challenging environment lived a man of 70 who knew every grain of sand, every star in the desert night sky. Joaquin was his name, though few remembered him fondly. A former ranch hand, he now survived as a vagrant, relying on odd jobs and the occasional generosity of the town's residents. His grizzled hair was constantly disheveled by the persistent wind, his sun-baked skin revealing decades of arduous labor under the unforgiving sky. But there was something special about that man that set him apart from others in similar situations. 3 distinct traits defined his unique personality: an unwavering dignity that made him hold his head high even in the most extreme adversity, a natural compassion for defenseless beings that compelled him to help even when he himself had absolutely nothing to offer, and a profound wisdom gained through suffering that allowed him to see beyond superficial appearances and understand the true nature of people. His most painful internal conflict was the constant battle he waged with himself, the bitterness over the social injustice he had suffered throughout his life, against the desperate need to keep his humanity intact, bravely resisting the desire for revenge that sometimes consumed his thoughts on the loneliest nights. Joaquin knew that to yield to hatred would mean losing the only thing he truly still possessed, his soul. While the rich man drove away from the desert, leaving the colt to die, neither he nor Joaquin knew that their destinies were about to intertwine in an unexpected way. A desperate mare galloped toward the settlement, her frantic whinny echoing through the approaching morning, carrying with it the harbinger of a journey that would forever change the lives of all involved. The following morning brought a spectacle no resident of the small settlement had ever witnessed. A magnificent mare with a coat black as night appeared running through the dirt roads, her hooves kicking up small clouds of dust as she whinnied desperately. Her eyes shone with deep anguish that touched the heart of anyone who observed them, and her agitation grew with each passing second she spent without finding what she sought. The animal ran from house to house, stopping before each door as if pleading for help. Her behavior was so human, so full of pure emotion, it sent shivers down the spines of those who witnessed the poignant scene. The mare desperately tried to guide someone, anyone, to a place only she knew. Her movements were urgent, her whinnies growing louder and more pleading, as if she understood that time was rapidly running out. But the residents, simple folk raised amidst the ancestral superstitions of the desert, observed the animal with a mix of fascination and paralyzing terror. Nervous whispers began to spread through the narrow streets like wildfire through dry straw. Some older women crossed themselves repeatedly, their voices trembling as they murmured old prayers in nearly forgotten dialects. "It's a ghost of the desert," murmured Mrs. Eleanor, an old woman with white hair who knew all the local legends, her wide eyes fixed on the animal with genuine fear as she slowly backed away. "My grandmother always said these beings appear to lure unsuspecting people into dangerous situations in the deadly sands. Whoever follows this creature is doomed to be lost forever." The mythical figure of the ghost of the desert was deeply rooted in the local culture. According to traditions passed down from generation to generation, they were spectral horses that appeared in moments of deepest despair, luring the unwary to follow them until they were eternally lost in the golden immensity of the dunes. Many stories were told of travelers who disappeared after following mysterious animals, their bodies never to be found again. Fear spread rapidly through the small community. Windows slammed shut, doors were hastily locked, and even the bravest children ran to hide behind their mothers' skirts. The mare continued her frantic search, but now found only frightened faces peeking through window cracks, no one daring to approach the creature they considered supernatural. It was then that Joaquin appeared on the main street, walking slowly with his makeshift walking stick made from a gnarled desert branch. His 70 years weighed on each step, but his experienced eyes carefully observed the animal's behavior. Unlike the other residents, he saw no haunted specter, but something much more real and urgent. As the mare approached him, Joaquin noticed details that others had missed amidst the superstitious panic. The sweat covering the animal's body was not spectral in origin, but the result of a real and grueling run. Road marks on her hooves indicated a long and difficult journey, but most importantly, Joaquin recognized something in the mare's desperate eyes that deeply touched his experienced heart. "You're a mother looking for her foal," he murmured softly, extending a trembling hand toward the animal. The mare stopped immediately before him, her dilated nostrils catching his scent as her eyes seemed to plead for understanding. "I know that despair, dear. I know exactly what you're feeling." Defying the desperate warnings of neighbors who shouted from their windows for him to stay away, Joaquin made a decision that would change everything forever. Completely ignoring the desperate pleas of his neighbors who implored him not to follow that cursed creature, Joaquin took a resolute step toward the mare. His joints protested painfully with the movement, cruelly reminding him of his advanced age and the limitations that time had imposed on his once strong body. But something in the fierce determination of that animal touched him deeply, stirring buried memories of his own journey of pain and loss. "Joaquin, for God's sake, don't do it," shouted Mr. Garcia, the local store owner, from his half-open door. "You'll die in the desert. That thing will lead you straight to hell." Other residents joined the chorus of protests, their voices filled with genuine fear and sincere concern for the old vagrant who, despite his circumstances, was respected by all for the dignity with which he faced his hardships. But Joaquin had already made his decision. Decades of desert experience had taught him to read the signs nature offered, and everything about that animal screamed a painful truth. She was a mother in absolute despair. He himself had lost a child years ago, and the agonizing pain he saw in the mare's eyes was too familiar to ignore. It was the same anguish he had carried in his own chest for so long. "I'll be back before nightfall," he said calmly, his voice firm despite the tremor age brought to his words. "If I don't return, you'll know I tried to do what was right." With these simple yet resolute words, he began to walk toward the desert, following the mare, who immediately understood his intentions and began to guide him. The journey began under the still, gentle morning sun, but Joaquin knew that in a few hours the heat would be merciless. His bare feet, accustomed to the harshness of the arid ground, stepped carefully on the sand that was beginning to warm. The mare maintained a thoughtful pace, constantly turning back to check if he could keep up, demonstrating an intelligence and sensitivity that confirmed his suspicions about the animal's true nature. As they moved away from the settlement, the terrain became increasingly challenging. Dunes rose like golden waves frozen in time, and the wind began to blow harder, carrying small grains of sand that stung Joaquin's wrinkled face. His simple clothes offered little protection against the elements, but he continued walking with unwavering determination. The mare seemed to know the exact path, but it was clear the journey was long and arduous. With each passing hour, the sun climbed higher in the relentless sky, transforming the desert into an open furnace. Sweat began to stream down Joaquin's face, his limited water reserves rapidly consumed by the increasing heat. His trembling legs protested with every step, but he refused to give up. During a rest stop in the sparse shade of a solitary rock, Joaquin observed his guide more closely. The mare was clearly exhausted, but her determination was even stronger than his. She drank only a few sips of the water he offered, as if she knew they needed to conserve every precious drop for what was to come. It was then that, in the distance, Joaquin spotted something that made his heart pound dangerously. A small, dark figure moved weakly on the sand, tethered to something that glinted under the scorching sun. The mare whinnied loudly and bolted toward that shadow, confirming the old man's worst fears about what they would find in that cursed place. The scene that unfolded before Joaquin's eyes was more devastating than any nightmare his mind could conjure. The colt lay almost motionless on the scorching sand, his breathing so faint it was barely perceptible. The heavy chain that bound him to the iron stake had left painful marks on his delicate skin, and his eyes, once bright, were now glazed over with extreme suffering. It was a miracle he was still alive after days exposed to the desert's relentless sun. The mare immediately rushed to her foal, sniffing him desperately and emitting low, anguished sounds that seemed like the laments of a broken mother. Joaquin felt tears well in his tired eyes as he witnessed that touching reunion between mother and child, both victims of a cruelty that defied any human comprehension. Whoever had done this was a monster, disguised as a person. Without wasting precious time, Joaquin knelt beside the colt, his experienced hands quickly examining the animal's condition. Dehydration was severe, hunger had consumed his reserves, and the heat had burned parts of his exposed skin, but life still pulsed in that brave little heart, and that was all Joaquin needed to know to begin the fight for salvation. Recalling the lessons he had learned decades ago working on ranches in the region, Joaquin began to look for specific desert plants he knew possessed high water content. His trembling but precise hands located some succulents hidden among the rocks, plants that had learned to survive by hoarding every drop of moisture in their fleshy leaves. With extreme care, he squeezed these improvised plants, letting precious water drip, drop by drop, onto the colt's parched lips. The process was slow and delicate. Each drop was a gift of life, and Joaquin administered the water with the patience of someone who understands the sacred value of every resource in the desert. The colt reacted weakly to the moisture, his tongue moving slightly to capture that unexpected blessing. It was a sign of hope that made the old man's heart quicken with contained joy. The next challenge was to free the animal from the cruel chain that bound him. Joaquin always carried some rudimentary tools with him, remnants of his former life as a worker, and now they became instruments of salvation. With a tenacity that defied his advanced age, he worked under the scorching sun to loosen the mechanism that held the colt captive. The metal was burning hot, scorching his hands with every touch, but he persisted with unwavering determination. It was during this arduous process that Joaquin made a discovery that left him perplexed. On the colt's coat, partially hidden by dirt and suffering, there was a distinctive mark, a specific symbol that served as an ownership brand. His experienced eyes immediately recognized that brand. It identified the animal as property of the region's renowned horse breeder, a respected man known for treating his animals with exceptional care. This revelation brought a wave of confusion to Joaquin's mind. Why would an animal belonging to such a respected breeder be abandoned to die in the desert? The contradiction was glaring and made no sense at all. But there was no time for deep reflection. The colt needed immediate care, and the sun continued its relentless march toward its zenith. Finally, after what seemed like hours of strenuous work, the chain released with a liberating click that echoed like celestial music in Joaquin's ears. The return to the settlement proved even more challenging than the journey out. Joaquin, already exhausted from the effort of freeing the colt, now faced the Herculean task of transporting a debilitated animal across the scorching immensity of the desert. His own strength was at its limit, his trembling legs barely able to support his own weight, let alone help carry the foal that faltered with every tentative step. The colt, though free from the chains, was so weak he could barely stand. His steps were uncertain, his wobbly legs threatened to give way at any moment, and several times he collapsed onto the hot sand, unable to continue. With each fall, Joaquin felt his heart clench with compassion and renewed determination. He hadn't come all this way to give up now, when salvation was within reach. The mare, demonstrating impressive maternal intelligence, positioned herself on the other side of the foal, creating a supportive barrier. Together, the old man and the desperate mother formed an unlikely but determined duo, carrying and supporting the colt every painful foot of the tortuous journey. The sun continued its relentless march across the sky, transforming the desert into a furnace that tested the limits of human and animal endurance. Joaquin felt every bead of sweat trickling down his wrinkled face, every muscle fiber in his aged body protesting against the superhuman effort he was making. His hands, burned by the hot metal of the chain, ached intensely with every movement. But something greater than physical pain propelled his steps, the iron determination to save an innocent life and a deep understanding of that mother's despair. Time seemed to have stopped in that golden expanse. Every dune overcome represented a small victory. Every rock shadow became a temporary oasis where the trio could rest briefly before continuing the fight for survival. Joaquin carefully rationed his water, prioritizing the colt, who needed every drop to stay conscious and moving. It was when they had covered approximately half the way back that the sky began to change ominously. On the horizon, a dark, menacing wall began to form, moving toward them with frightening speed. Joaquin immediately recognized the signs. A sandstorm was approaching, and they were completely exposed in the middle of the desert with no shelter in sight. "My God," he murmured, his voice hoarse from the dryness in his throat. A sandstorm was one of the desert's most dangerous phenomena, capable of completely disorienting a person in minutes, causing them to be lost forever in the vastness. Many bodies had been found years later, mummified by the sand and heat, victims of these deadly gales. The wind began to blow harder, bringing with it the first grains of sand from the approaching storm. The mare whinnied nervously, her animal instinct sensing the imminent danger long before human senses could grasp the full extent of the threat. The colt, in his debilitated state, would have no chance of surviving the impending gale. Joaquin looked around desperately, searching for any kind of natural shelter or protection. But the landscape offered only endless dunes and sparse rocks that would provide insufficient cover. The wall of sand approached inexorably, like a terrestrial tsunami ready to swallow everything in its path. It seemed that, after all the effort and sacrifice, they were condemned to perish when salvation seemed so near. The sandstorm hit the trio with devastating fury, transforming the world around them into a golden, suffocating haze. The wind howled like a wounded beast, carrying millions of grains of sand that lashed their bodies like tiny, sharp blades. Visibility dropped to zero in a matter of seconds, and Joaquin felt icy panic crawl up his spine as he realized they had completely lost their bearings. The colt immediately collapsed, unable to withstand the gale's force in his weakened state. Joaquin threw himself over the animal, trying to shield him with his own frail body, while the mare strategically positioned herself to form an additional barrier against the furious elements. Sand entered their eyes, nose, and mouth, making every breath difficult and turning every second into a desperate fight for survival. "We're not giving up now," Joaquin yelled against the deafening roar of the wind, his words immediately swallowed by the storm. He hugged the colt more tightly, feeling the small, fragile heart beating rapidly against his chest. The little creature trembled not only from cold, but also from fear, his large eyes desperately searching for safety in that absolute chaos. It was in this moment of total despair that something extraordinary happened. The mare, guided by a maternal instinct that defied any rational explanation, began to move with astonishing determination through the blinding storm. Her steps were firm and decisive, as if she could see through the impenetrable curtain of sand that enveloped them. She whinnied softly, a sound that seemed to say, "Follow me, I know the way." Joaquin, trusting that desperate mother completely, lifted the colt into his trembling arms and followed the mare blindly through the sandy inferno. Every step was a gamble on life, every movement a demonstration of faith in the ancestral wisdom of the desert animals. His muscles screamed in pain. His lungs burned from the inhaled sand, but he kept walking, painful step after painful step. The storm seemed to last an eternity, though it was likely only a few hours of torment. When the winds finally began to subside and visibility gradually returned, Joaquin was surprised to discover they were much closer to the settlement than he had imagined. The mare had found a more direct path, navigating the storm with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. The first houses of the settlement emerged from the golden haze like mirages, becoming reality. Joaquin felt tears of relief mix with the sand on his face as he walked through the familiar streets, carrying the colt who now showed signs of improvement. The mare trotted beside them, her head held high with maternal pride, as if she knew she had accomplished something truly heroic. The residents, who had sheltered in their homes during the storm, began to cautiously emerge to check for damage. What they saw left them completely dumbfounded. Joaquin walking through the sand-covered streets, carrying a clearly debilitated colt, followed by a magnificent mare who no longer showed any signs of the supernatural agitation that had haunted the town that morning. The scene was so touching and powerful that even the most superstitious among them immediately understood the truth. There were no ghosts or evil spirits involved, just a desperate mother who had found in Joaquin the only human brave enough to help her save her child. The old vagrant had proven once again that true nobility resides not in wealth or social standing, but in the courage to do what is right when all others cower. The first week after the rescue completely transformed the atmosphere of the small settlement. The residents, deeply moved by the heroic scene of old Joaquin emerging from the sandstorm with the colt in his arms, quickly overcame their ancestral superstitions and mobilized in a touching display of human solidarity. Mrs. Elena, the same old woman who had warned about the ghosts of the desert, was the first to offer her home as temporary shelter for the animals. An improvised shelter was collectively built behind the local community center, with each family contributing what they could: old timber, pieces of tarp, ropes, and even some homemade remedies that might aid the colt's recovery. The animal gradually began to show encouraging signs of improvement. His eyes regained some of their lost sparkle. He could stand for longer periods and even took a few faltering steps under his mother's watchful and loving gaze. Joaquin dedicated most of his days caring for the horses, sharing precious water from his own rations and applying the traditional healing knowledge he had learned decades ago. His tireless dedication inspired even the most skeptical, and soon a small crowd of curious onlookers formed, coming daily to check on the animals and offer help to the old hero. It was during this first week of recovery that the first major turning point in the story occurred. On the morning of a sunny Thursday, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced the arrival of a convoy of expensive vehicles that contrasted starkly with the simplicity of the settlement. The lead vehicle was a luxury pickup truck that stopped directly in front of the improvised shelter where the horses were. From the vehicle stepped a man of approximately 50, dressed in fine but practical clothing, typical of someone accustomed to working with high-quality animals. His graying hair was perfectly coiffed, and his experienced eyes quickly scanned the scene, assessing the situation with a professional's trained gaze. It was Edward "Ed" Miller, the renowned horse breeder from the region, owner of one of the most respected ranches for hundreds of miles around. When Ed spotted the mare and the colt, his expression changed completely. His eyes filled with tears of relief, and he rushed toward the animals like a father reuniting with lost children. "Star, my boy," he exclaimed, carefully embracing the colt who, though still weak, immediately showed recognition of his true owner. The mare whinnied softly, as if recounting the entire story of suffering and salvation they had endured. But the true surprise came when Ed turned to thank the residents, and his eyes met Joaquin's face. For a long moment, both men stared at each other in silence, the decades seeming to vanish before a shared memory that harked back to the distant past. Slowly, a smile of recognition and respect formed on the horse breeder's face. "Joaquin Ramirez," Ed said with a voice heavy with genuine emotion. "I should have known. When they told me a brave old man had saved my horses, I should have known it could only be you." He approached and extended his hand with reverence. "You were the best ranch hand I ever had." A man of exemplary character who always treated the animals as if they were his own children. The revelation that Joaquin had worked for Ed decades ago surprised everyone present, but it perfectly explained why the old vagrant possessed such profound knowledge of horse care and why he had risked his own life to save animals in distress. The reunion between Ed and Joaquin unleashed an avalanche of memories that had remained buried for decades. As the residents watched with growing curiosity, the two men conversed at length about the times they had worked together, when Joaquin was considered the finest horse handler in the entire region. Ed recalled with admiration how the young Joaquin possessed a natural gift for understanding animals, an almost mystical connection that allowed him to heal wounds others considered impossible. "Remember the mare, Tempest?" Ed asked, his eyes shining with the memory. "Dish, all the vets said she'd never walk again after that accident. But you spent 3 months caring for her, sleeping in the stable, hand-feeding her. When she galloped again, I knew I had witnessed a miracle." Joaquin smiled shyly, his calloused hands gently stroking the colt's muzzle, which now rested in his lap. Joaquin's personal story gradually unfolded for the fascinated residents. Decades ago, He had been forced to leave his ranch work after a series of tragic events: the death of his wife in an accident, the loss of his only son to illness, and subsequently a back injury that limited his physical capacity for heavy labor. Too proud to accept charity, he had left in search of a new life, eventually arriving at that small settlement where he lived in quiet dignity. Ed, deeply moved by the story and the recent heroism of his former employee, immediately offered a generous monetary reward for the rescue of his precious horses. His gratitude was genuine, and the sum offered would be enough to completely transform Joaquin's life, providing him comfort and security in his remaining years. But the old man's response surprised everyone present. "Mr. Miller," Joaquin said with his characteristic dignity, "I didn't save your horses expecting a reward. I did what any decent person would do upon seeing the suffering of innocent creatures. I cannot accept money for simply doing what was right." His refusal was as firm as it was respectful, demonstrating a moral integrity that left Ed even more impressed. After a few moments of reflection, Joaquin made a modest request that deeply touched the breeder's heart. "If you truly wish to give me something in return, I would only ask for permission to visit your horses occasionally. I miss the company of these noble animals, and I believe they would also benefit from my presence." Ed not only immediately agreed, but also offered a small part-time job at the ranch, respecting Joaquin's physical limitations. This extraordinary display of character by Joaquin sparked even greater admiration among the residents of the settlement, but it also attracted unwanted attention. Among the people who had gathered to witness the emotional reunion, someone observed the scene from afar with cold, calculating eyes. Hidden behind an abandoned building, a man dressed in expensive clothes mentally registered every detail of the conversation. It was Rick Blackwood, the same man who had abandoned the COLT to die in the desert. His fury grew with every word of praise directed at Joaquin, with every show of respect Ed displayed for the old vagrant. His plan for revenge had completely failed, and now he discovered that the one responsible for spoiling his cruel satisfaction was precisely a despicable vagrant living in miserable conditions. When Rick realized Joaquin had been the hero responsible for the rescue, his rage reached dangerous levels. Not only had his act of cruelty been thwarted, but now that insignificant old man was being celebrated as a hero by the very community he despised. The public humiliation of seeing his plans undone by someone he considered inferior was intolerable for his wounded pride. During the second week after the heroic rescue, something extraordinary began to happen in the small settlement that had remained forgotten by the world for so many decades. News of the miraculous horse rescue spread like wildfire through neighboring communities, carried by travelers, merchants, and even by the residents themselves, who now recounted the story with genuine pride during their visits to other towns. What began as casual curiosity soon transformed into something much larger. People from distant localities began to arrive at the settlement, initially just to meet the famous Joaquin and see the horses that had been central to such a touching story. But as visitors discovered the genuine hospitality of the residents and the rustic beauty of that small oasis in the middle of the desert, many decided to extend their stays. Mr. Garcia's small general store, which normally sold only basic necessities to local inhabitants, suddenly found itself bustling with people buying impromptu souvenirs and supplies for their journeys. Mrs. Elena began preparing homemade meals for the visitors, her simple yet flavorful food earning enthusiastic praise from people accustomed to big city luxuries. For Joaquin, this new reality was simultaneously gratifying and disconcerting. A simple man who had always valued his privacy, he now found himself at the center of attention, with people repeatedly wanting to hear the story of how he had saved the horses in the sandstorm. Despite the initial discomfort, he gradually began to appreciate the opportunity to share his experiences and wisdom accumulated over 7 decades of life. But not everyone was pleased with this sudden transformation. Richard Blackwood observed the settlement's growing popularity with a toxic mix of envy and escalating rage. For him, seeing that miserable place prosper due to the actions of a vagrant was an unbearable personal affront. His calculating mind began to plot ways to reverse a situation he considered a cosmic injustice. During his discreet investigations into Joaquin's past, Rick made a discovery he considered a golden opportunity for his revenge. The land where Joaquin's humble shack had stood for over a decade legally belonged to a defunct corporation that had gone belly up years ago. The rights to that property had never been formally transferred, creating a legal loophole that could be exploited by someone with sufficient financial resources. Driven by cruel determination, Rick secretly began the process of purchasing these rights through intermediaries, ensuring no one discovered his true identity during the negotiations. His plan was simple but devastating. Legally acquire the property where Joaquin lived and then evict him, thereby destroying his source of tranquility and forcing him to abandon the settlement he so admired. The legal process was accelerated through strategic bribes and political pressure exerted through his influential connections. Rick knew that once he possessed the legal documents, he could act quickly before any organized resistance could form. His calculating coldness allowed him to plan every move with surgical precision, anticipating possible obstacles and preparing countermeasures. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the sinister machinations unfolding in the shadows, Joaquin continued his simple yet satisfying routine, dividing his time between caring for the horses at Ed's ranch and helping the town residents welcome visitors. His genuine joy in seeing the community prosper prevented him from noticing the ominous signs of an approaching storm. Soon, he would discover that doing good does not always protect a person from the consequences of others. Malice. The third week brought a dark shift in the settlement's previously hopeful atmosphere. On the morning of a grey Monday, two men in formal suits arrived in an official car, carrying leather briefcases and serious expressions that contrasted sharply with the simple joy that had permeated the community. They sought out the modest house where Joaquin had lived for over a decade. The document they presented was legally impeccable, drafted in complex legal language that few in the settlement could fully comprehend. In simple terms, it stated that the land where Joaquin's shack was built had been legally acquired by a real estate development firm, and that he had exactly 30 days to voluntarily vacate the property or face forced eviction proceedings. The news spread through the settlement like a devastating wildfire. The residents, who had learned to admire and respect Joaquin not only for his recent heroism, but also for his unwavering dignity during all the years they had lived with him, were outraged by this blatant injustice. How was it possible that someone could just appear and claim land where a man had built his modest but honest life? Mrs. Elena was the first to publicly speak out against the decision. "Joaquin has lived here longer than some of us," she declared loudly in the central square, her words laden with genuine indignation. "He's cared for this land, respected it, and now that he's finally getting the recognition he deserves, they want to take him away. This is unacceptable cowardice." Mr. Garcia, normally a cautious man when it came to trouble, this time joined the chorus of protests. "This man risked his life to save 2 horses in the desert," he said, pounding his fist on his general store counter. "If there's justice in this world, it should protect people like Joaquin, not allow them to be persecuted by the petty interests of rich folk." The community's resistance surprised even Joaquin himself, who had spent so many years accustomed to facing life's hardships alone. Seeing those simple people, who had their own worries and limitations, unite in his defense deeply moved him. Silent tears streamed down his wrinkled face as he watched neighbors he considered mere acquaintances transform into loyal defenders of his cause. The spontaneous mobilization of the residents quickly took shape. A petition was organized, collecting signatures not only from local residents, but also from visitors who continued to arrive at the settlement, drawn by the story of the rescued horses. Many of these visitors, touched by the injustice of the situation, offered financial support to help Joaquin hire a lawyer or find legal alternatives. Edward Miller, when he learned of the situation through Joaquin, was furious. "This is unacceptable," he declared categorically. "I'll find out who's behind this cowardly persecution and do everything in my power to stop it." Immediately, he put his own lawyers at Joaquin's disposal and began his own investigations into the mysterious development company that had acquired the land. But Richard Blackwood had planned every move with meticulous care. Using intermediaries and shell corporations, he managed to keep his identity completely hidden throughout the acquisition process. When Ed tried to discover who was truly behind the purchase, he found only a series of corporate entities that led to bureaucratic dead ends. As the days passed and the 30-day deadline approached inexorably, tension in the settlement grew palpably. The residents took turns keeping vigil at Joaquin's house, symbolically demonstrating that they would not allow him to be removed without resistance. The atmosphere of celebration that had dominated the previous weeks was replaced by a grim but resolute determination. The fourth week began with an extraordinary demonstration of human solidarity that no one in the settlement had ever witnessed. On the day set for Joaquin's official eviction, the residents organized themselves spontaneously and courageously, forming a human barrier around the old hero's modest home. Men, women, children, and even visitors who barely knew Joaquin personally stood arm in arm, creating a protective circle that symbolized the community's unity against injustice. The judicial officials who arrived to execute the eviction were visibly unnerved by this peaceful but determined resistance. They had never faced a situation where an entire community mobilized to protect one of its members in such an organized and emotional way. The scene was simultaneously touching and powerful. Dozens of simple people, united by a common sense of justice, peacefully defying a legal system that seemed to favor only those with financial resources. "We won't let them take our Joaquin," declared Mrs. Elena with a firmness that surprised even herself. "This man represents all that is good left in the world, and if you want to remove him, you'll have to remove all of us first." Her words were met with a chorus of approval that echoed throughout the central square, demonstrating that the resistance was not just symbolic, but genuinely determined. The situation quickly garnered the attention of the regional media. Reporters from local newspapers and even a television station arrived at the settlement to document this extraordinary human story. The narrative of an elderly man being persecuted after heroically saving 2 horses in the desert captured the imagination of the wider public, transforming a local conflict into a cause of regional interest. Interviews with Joaquin revealed not only his genuine humility, but also his profound wisdom about human nature and the importance of fundamental values. "I'm not fighting for myself," he calmly explained to the cameras. "I'm fighting for the idea that doing good should be rewarded, not punished. If we allow cruelty to triumph over compassion, we will lose something precious in our humanity." Edward Miller, frustrated with his fruitless attempts to uncover the true buyer's identity through conventional legal means, decided to adopt a more direct approach. Using his contacts in the regional business community, he began making discreet inquiries about who might have a specific interest in harming Joaquin. His persistent investigation finally began to yield promising leads. It was during this investigation that Ed made a shocking discovery that would completely change his understanding of the situation. Through a friend who worked in real estate, he discovered that the purchasing company had financial ties to Richard Blackwood, the same man who had recently gained notoriety for his controversial practices among horse breeders. The connection wasn't immediately obvious, But for someone experienced in tracing complex transactions, the signs were clear. When Ed understood that Rick could be behind Joaquin's persecution, a wave of indignation and understanding hit him simultaneously. He recalled the recent auction where he had outbid Rick for an exceptional stud horse, and how the young businessman had reacted with disproportionate rage to the defeat. The possibility that Rick had abandoned the horses as revenge, only to see his plans thwarted by Joaquin, began to make terrible sense. But Ed knew that suspicions weren't enough to prove anything legally. He needed concrete evidence to expose the truth and protect Joaquin from the unjust persecution. Meanwhile, the legal deadline continued to approach inexorably, and tension in the settlement grew with each passing day, everyone knowing that a decisive confrontation was rapidly approaching. The fifth week brought the most desperate moment of the entire saga. Richard Blackwood, frustrated by the unexpected resistance and the media attention that was complicating his plans, decided to drastically accelerate his actions. In the early hours of a Friday morning, heavy machinery and excavators silently arrived at the settlement, strategically positioning themselves around Joaquin's house like war machines prepared for battle. When the sun rose and the residents discovered the menacing equipment, panic quickly set in. Rick had hired a demolition company, claiming urgent real estate development, using his influence to fast-track all necessary bureaucratic processes. His intention was clear and cruel: physically destroy Joaquin's home, forcing him to leave regardless of the community's resistance. "Doc, you have 2 hours to remove all belongings." The demolition crew supervisor, a large and intimidating man who clearly had no interest in the human story behind the situation, announced coldly, "After that deadline, we will begin ground preparation work, with or without your cooperation." The news spread like lightning through the settlement. Within minutes, dozens of people gathered again around Joaquin's house. But this time the situation was much more tense and dangerous. The excavators were not just symbols of threat, they were real instruments of destruction that could cause serious damage if the resistance continued. It was in this moment of extreme tension that something completely unexpected happened. An elderly woman, who rarely left her home due to advanced age, appeared walking slowly down the main street, leaning on a wooden cane and carrying a folder of documents yellowed with time. It was Mrs. Eleanor, the oldest resident of the settlement, a 92-year-old woman who had witnessed decades of local history. "Stop everything immediately," she said, with a frail but authoritative voice that surprised everyone present. Her small but bright eyes fixed on the demolition supervisor with a determination that defied her fragile appearance. "This land cannot be commercially developed. It's protected cultural heritage." The documents Mrs. Eleanor carried told an extraordinary story that had remained forgotten for decades. The land where Joaquin's house stood, as well as a significant area around it, had been considered sacred by the ancestral Native American peoples who inhabited the desert long before the arrival of European settlers. Ancient maps, written testimonies, and even historical photographs proved that the region contained archaeological sites of inestimable value. The revelation caused immediate uproar. The demolition supervisor, clearly unprepared to face historical preservation issues, made urgent phone calls to his superiors. Government representatives were contacted, archaeological experts were summoned, and the entire demolition process was indefinitely suspended while the competent authorities investigated the veracity of the claims. Richard Blackwood, watching his carefully planned operation crumble before documents he could never have foreseen, felt an uncontrollable fury swell in his chest. All his financial resources, all his political influence, all his legal maneuvers had been neutralized by a 92-year-old woman and some yellowed papers kept in an old folder. But his rage blinded him to the reality that he had made a fatal error. By bringing in the excavators and creating all that public commotion, he had drawn too much attention to himself. Edward Miller, who had been discreetly investigating the financial connections, now had enough clues to track down Joaquin's persecutor. The web of lies and intermediaries that Richard had carefully constructed was beginning to unravel rapidly. The legal battle that followed the discovery of the historical documents transformed the small settlement into the center of a complex legal dispute that attracted national attention. Archaeological experts quickly confirmed the authenticity of the ancestral sites, but Richard, using his vast network of expensive lawyers and political connections, managed to technically question the validity of the documents presented by Mrs. Eleanor, claiming they did not follow modern legal protocols for heritage preservation. During a crucial hearing at the regional courthouse, Joaquin was called to testify about his connection to the land and its importance to the local community. Despite his fragile health and the intimidating pressure of the formal legal environment, he spoke with a simple but powerful eloquence about how that place represented not only his home, but also a symbol of the possibility of a dignified life, even in the humblest circumstances. It was during this tense hearing that the decisive moment occurred that would change everything forever. Edward had brought the two horses Joaquin had saved, hoping their presence might sway the judge regarding the old man's heroic character. When the colt, now fully recovered but still young, was led into the courthouse courtyard, something extraordinary happened. Richard Blackwood was present at the hearing, observing the proceedings from a section reserved for the public. The moment the colt caught sight of him, the animal had a violent and terrifying reaction that shocked everyone present. The young horse began to tremble uncontrollably. His eyes widened with pure panic, and he desperately tried to back away, whinnying in an emotional agony that was painful to witness. The colt's reaction was so intense and specific that it left no doubt as to its meaning. Edward, who profoundly understood equine behavior, immediately realized he was witnessing the traumatic recognition of an aggressor. "That animal knows you," he declared, pointing directly at Richard. "He's terrified because he remembers you. You were the one who abandoned him in the desert." Confronted publicly before dozens of witnesses, journalists, and judicial authorities, Richard finally lost the control he had carefully maintained during all those months of manipulation. His mask of calculated coldness completely crumbled, revealing the fury and despair that had motivated all his cruel actions. "Yes, it was me!" he screamed, his voice laden with a bitterness that had grown for years. "And I'd do it all again." But then, in a moment of unexpected vulnerability that surprised even himself, Richard revealed the deepest and most painful truth behind his actions. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "Edward was more than just my mentor in the horse world. He was my biological father, though he never officially acknowledged me. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of his approval, but he always rejected me." The shocking revelation about his paternity completely transformed everyone's perception of the conflict's nature. The professional rivalry that seemed to motivate Richard was in fact a deep family wound that had never healed. His hatred for Joaquin wasn't just about the saved horses, but about seeing his biological father show more affection and respect for a former employee than he had ever shown for his own son. Edward was visibly shaken by the revelation, his eyes filling with tears as he understood for the first time the extent of the pain he had unconsciously caused. The hearing was suspended amidst the emotional turmoil, but the truth had finally been revealed, paving the way for a resolution no one could have anticipated. In the days following the devastating revelation in court, the settlement found itself immersed in an atmosphere of deep reflection and unexpected transformation. Edward, confronted with the truth about his biological son and the suffering his rejection had caused, spent sleepless nights reflecting on his past choices and how he might repair decades of unrecognized pain. The discovery forced him to confront aspects of himself he had preferred to ignore. Joaquin, moved by the same compassion that had led him to save the horses in the desert, made a decision that surprised everyone involved. Instead of seeking punishment or revenge against Richard, he did something that demonstrated the true greatness of his character. He offered forgiveness and an opportunity for redemption. "Pain makes people do terrible things," he said calmly, "but it also offers a chance for growth, if we are willing to learn from it." Joaquin's proposal was revolutionary in its simplicity. Richard could avoid criminal charges if he agreed to spend a year working in the settlement, learning the desert traditions and the true value of water, animals, and simple living. It would be a constructive form of penance that would benefit both the young businessman and the community he had tried to harm. Initially, Richard rejected the offer with disdain, considering it an unacceptable humiliation for someone of his social standing. But Edward, now understanding his responsibility as a father, firmly supported Joaquin's proposal. "It's that, or face the full legal consequences of your actions," he told his son with a firmness laden with belated love. "This might be your only chance to find the peace you've been looking for all this time." After weeks of internal resistance and external pressure, Richard finally accepted the agreement. His arrival at the settlement to begin community work was met with justifiable skepticism by the residents, but Joaquin insisted on giving the young man a genuine opportunity for change. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he patiently repeated whenever someone questioned the wisdom of his decision. The transformation process was slow and painful. Richard, accustomed to luxury and power, initially struggled with the simple tasks assigned to him: caring for the animals, helping with house maintenance, working in the community garden that had been created thanks to the new water sources discovered by the COLT. But gradually, something began to shift in his fundamental perspective on life. The turning point came when Richard had to care for an orphan lamb that had been rejected by its mother. Seeing his own story reflected in that helpless animal, he experienced for the first time a genuine connection with a vulnerable being who depended completely on his care. The experience awakened in him a capacity for compassion that had remained buried under years of bitterness and resentment. Over the following months, the aquifer discovered by the COLT was declared a community resource, managed by a council that included Joaquin, representatives of the settlement, and, surprisingly, Richard, who now used his business acumen to protect rather than exploit natural resources. The small oasis flourished, becoming a model of sustainable living with the desert. The story ends a year later, with the settlement transformed into a thriving ecotourism hub where visitors learn about sustainability, desert traditions, and the power of human redemption. Joaquin, now respected as the community elder, spends his days sharing stories and wisdom. Richard, stripped of his former arrogance, found purpose in protecting the environment he once despised. Edward visits regularly, slowly rebuilding the relationship with the son he finally acknowledged. And the two horses, eternal symbols of resilience and hope, graze freely on the protected lands, reminding everyone that even in the most arid places, compassion can make life flourish where once there was only desolation.